Pray. Amen.
All right, we're in Song of Solomon chapter 8. This is the last chapter in this book, and I've really enjoyed preaching through this. There's a lot of great information. It's a really interesting book. I believe chapter 8 is the most interesting chapter. I believe there's the most information that we can learn. So yes, it is the last chapter, but I encourage you to pay attention, take notes. There's a lot of interesting information in this chapter. So starting at verse number 1, it says, "O that thou wert as my brother that sucked the breasts of my mother. When I should find thee without, I would kiss thee, yea, I should not be despised." Now, there's a lot of information in this verse, and what she says there at the beginning is, "O that thou wert as my brother that sucked the breasts of my mother." You say, what is that referring to? It's referring to a mom breastfeeding her child. "O that thou wert as my brother that sucked the breasts of my mother." Referring to a mom breastfeeding her child. Okay, and as I talked about last week, that is a normal part of life, moms breastfeeding their children. We live in a society where people have just a couple kids, but in the past, people had 6, 7, 8, 9 kids. And you know what? When you have a lot of kids, there's going to be a lot of moms with young babies, and they're going to be breastfeeding those babies, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Obviously, that's the way that God designed it. It is a natural thing. And I do believe that women should strive to be modest when they do that, but I also believe that we as people should be understanding that it's not always the easiest thing, right? For moms and babies, I mean, it's like you try to be modest, but sometimes there's not really as much of an opportunity. But the Bible's speaking about that, but here's the thing. It's using that as an example, and she's saying, "I wish you were like my brother that sucked the breasts of my mother," to describe something that would actually be very passionate in marriage. This is actually the one verse in the Song of Solomon that if you understand what's being said, not taking it out of context, it does make you feel slightly uncomfortable. Because here's the thing, it's normal for a baby to be getting milk from their mom, but if you saw a husband and a wife doing that in public, you'd be like, what is wrong with you? Right? So the question is, why is the Bible mentioning that? She says it in passing, but that is what she's referring to. Well, actually, notice what it says the rest of the verse. "When I should find thee without." What does it mean by without? I mean, the Bible speaks about being without the city. Without means away from people. What she's saying is when I should find you one-on-one, when I should find thee without, away from other people, it says, "I would kiss thee, yea, I should not be despised." What does it mean to be despised? Despise is to hate, so being despised is to be hated. What she's stating is, if I found my husband away from anybody else, then marriage is honorable and all, and the bed undefiled. And what's between a husband and a wife in the privacy between themselves is between them, right? Because here's the thing about this. I mean, people that are married in this room, you know, my wife and I, we have 3 kids. What does that tell you? We have a normal marriage. Do you hate me because I have 3 kids? I despise Brother Stuckey. How dare you have 3 children? Right? People that are married in this room that have, we have, I think, 5 moms that are expecting at our church. 5 ladies are expecting children. Do you despise those husbands and wives because they're expecting children? Of course not. You say, why? Because it was done without. It was done away from people. And what this verse is actually referring to is it's talking about the subject of public displays of affection. We do state that we believe the Bible speaks about all topics. And we don't just state that, we mean it. And we might not know where the Bible talks about something, but I believe the answers are in the Bible even if I don't have the knowledge on a topic. And what the Bible's stating is that if you get too inappropriate in front of people as a married person, husband and a wife, then it will cause people to despise you or to hate you or to look down on you. Now here's the thing about this. As I said last week, I don't think you could really define this part of the body as nakedness according to the Word of God. Okay, now I would say it's not modest if you show off this part of your body, but you wouldn't refer to it as nakedness. So the thing is, and you know, it mentions that aspect, you know, something very passionate, but it also mentions her like kissing him, just thinking of kissing on the mouth or whatever. Here's the thing, I can't say that a husband and a wife doing that is a sin. I can't point to a verse that would say that, but what I can state is if you make people feel uncomfortable by being too close to one another, it will cause people to despise you. It will cause people to hate you. Doesn't that just make sense? Right. I used the example yesterday, you know, I often go soul winning in Nepo Park because it's just 10, 15 minutes from my house, and often we go there on Saturdays. And you know what, sometimes you'll have like a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and by the way, if you're not married, any of this is inappropriate, right? Regardless of whether or not it's without or within, right? It's like inappropriate. But you'll see like a boyfriend and a girlfriend being like really, close to one another in public, like really all over each other. I'll just be honest, I am less likely to approach them with the gospel than just two other people that are just sitting there, right? Because it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. And I can't state that it's a sin. I would just state I am one of those people. I don't like PDA, right? I'm not someone, my wife and I, we don't get involved in PDA in front of people. I wouldn't feel comfortable. My wife wouldn't. And it would also cause other people to feel uncomfortable as well. Now, this is one of those topics where I don't have a black and white, here's the line. What's being mentioned in verse 1 at the beginning intentionally makes us feel a bit uncomfortable because it's trying to prove a point where everybody would say that's too far, right? But where exactly would that line be of being inappropriate? Well, I mean, everybody would look at that line a little bit differently. Me personally, I would have no problem with a husband and a wife holding hands. I don't have any problem whatsoever. Or a guy, husband or wife, putting their arm around each other, or even a quick kiss on the cheek or a quick kiss on the lips. That doesn't bother me. If people go further than that, it's like it does make me feel uncomfortable. It's like, whoa. It's like, that's too far. Now, obviously, there can be certain occasions. For example, when you have a bride and a groom stand before an altar and then they say, I do, it's like, it doesn't bother me if it's a really long kiss. It's like they just got married. It's like not a big deal. Or let's say, for example, the husband's been away from, on work for a long time and he comes home. Of course, they meet at the airport, huge hug, kiss. That wouldn't really make me, uncomfortable because that would be expected, right? But, and as I said, you don't have a black and white, here's the line, but I would just say that all of us should strive to have a strong testimony. And we should strive not to do anything that would make people feel uncomfortable, okay? Now, here's the thing. You can't really point to a verse that says somebody is in sin for doing something that makes you feel uncomfortable because I can't point to a verse that would state, kissing or being really touchy-feely is a sin. I would just state that it can make you lose your testimony. Now, of course, if you go too far, there are certain things, if you're showing off, nakedness and all kinds, that's definitely inappropriate. But the idea the Bible's trying to state is try not to make people feel uncomfortable based on what you're doing around each other. Now, here in the Philippines, Philippines is not really a country, as far as I understand, that's really, has a lot of public displays of affection compared to some other countries. I'm not really sure. But the Bible's stating, be careful not to cause yourself to be looked down on based on how you interact with your spouse in public. Verse number 2, I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house who would instruct me. Now, verse 2 is one of the verses where people come up with very weird and perverted interpretations. And how some people interpret this is basically she's going with her husband to get really intimate and her mom's instructing her on how to do it. That's weird. That's perverted. I mean, if that's your first thought, I would say, look back over the verse and just use some common sense. Okay, I must just not be understanding this verse. Okay, because that is very weird and perverted. Okay. Let's look at what this verse is saying. I would lead thee and bring thee into our house. Is that what it says? It says into my mother's house. What's that called? It's called a husband and a wife visiting the mom. Bring thee into my mother's house. Husbands and wives get intimate in their own houses, in their own bedroom, not in their mom's house, right? I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house, okay? But it said, but who would instruct me? What is the Bible saying? Who would instruct me? Her mom is instructing her about something. What is that referring to? Go to Titus 2. Titus 2. And if you're cross-referencing in your head, then you should probably know what I'm going to, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense. As I said, I'm very dogmatic. These are newlyweds. They do not have children, even more so than I was before preaching through this. And so you've got a new wife, a new husband, a new wife. Anytime you do something and you're new at it, you're not going to be good at it. There's a lot to learn, right? I mean, I hope that you're studying the Song of Solomon. I hope you memorize it. I hope you're really taking these sermons in and everything. But the reality is you could memorize this book and know everything about this book, but if you're not yet married, you still have a lot to learn once you actually do say I do. It's like basically getting a college degree and having a 4.0 and being the smartest student. First day on the job, you're the worst employee because you're new at it. It takes time to apply that knowledge, and you need experience. I deeply studied this book right before I got married, memorized this book. I knew a lot of information, but then it's like once you get married, it's like, okay, now how do you apply this information, right? It's like it's a whole brand new thing. And so when someone first gets married, honestly, you know what? There's a lot to learn about being a wife, a lot to learn about being a husband. Here's what it says in Titus 2, verse 3. The aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. The Bible states the aged women are going to be teachers of good things. Does that mean they're going to preach sermons? Does that mean they're going to get up here and give? No, this is what it says in verse 4, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. What they're teaching the young women is to love their husbands. You say, Brother Stuckey, I told my spouse I love them, the day we got married, so of course I love my husband. Yeah, but you know what? When you first get married, there's a lot to learn, and you're going to go through trials. You're going to go through difficulties. And it actually takes time to learn to love your husband, learn to love your children. Look, as husbands, we're not always the most lovable. Right? There are times I don't have a good attitude. If I don't get much sleep, it's just like, I'm a very grumpy person, right? I can be in a very bad mood and short-tempered, it's hard when you first get married, both for a wife and a husband, to learn to be a good husband, learn to be a good wife. And if it was so easy, there would be no Song of Solomon, right? The reason why we have this book is simply because all of us have a lot to learn. We can admit that, right? There's a lot to learn about being a husband, being a wife, being a father, being a mother. And it's something your whole life you're going to learn and grow and learn new things, okay? And what the Bible says for young women, it's good at a young age for them to learn to be a good wife, to be a good mom, to learn how to keep the home and take care of things. And so here is a woman, Solomon's wife, that is getting instruction from her mom. And you know what? She's completely fine with getting instruction. She's humble enough to realize, I'm not an expert. Now, of course, you got to be very careful where you're getting knowledge from. Because if you get knowledge from the wrong source, if you get knowledge from the world about raising kids, they're going to give you the wrong advice. So, of course, you got to use wisdom, but they're getting it from godly women. Godly women are, in general, going to give good advice, right? Go back to Song of Solomon 8. So what's she instructing her daughter about? Well, she's instructing her daughter about how to keep the home, how to be a good wife. They're at her mother's house, and so it's like, I'm sure her mom is the house is probably very neat, taking care of things, cooking and stuff like that. And you say, well, how do you know that that's what it's referring to? The rest of the verse proves it. Look at what the rest of the verse says. I would cause thee to drink of spiced wine of the juice of my pomegranate. You say, what's this referring to? It's referring to juice, literal juice. You say, well, why is she instructing? Because they had to make juice back then. They didn't just buy it at Robinson's. They had to make juice. That takes time. That takes effort. And that's something that, a new wife might not know how to do. Right? Basically, she's cooking and taking care of her husband, so what's happening? Well, her mom is actually instructing her, hey, you know what? Here's how you make the juice. Hey, here's how you keep the home. The Bible's telling us in that verse, what she's instructing her daughter about is how to be a good wife, how to keep the home. That's what she's instructing her about. All you got to do is cross-reference and look at the context, and you can tell that that's what it's referring to. I don't know. People get very confused in some verses, and they get super poetic with some of the stuff. It's just literally juice. That's what's actually being mentioned in verse 2. That's what it's referring to. Okay. Verse 3. His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that ye stir not up nor wake my love until he please. Verse 5. Now, verse 5 is one of the most complicated, perhaps the most complicated verse in this book. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on it. And I do understand this verse now, but I'll be honest, I used to read it and I'm like, what is going on, right? It's really hard to figure out what's going on. And in verse 5, what you basically have is Solomon's mother-in-law, the mom of Solomon's wife, is basically talking to her daughter, okay? And it gets complicated because she talks sometimes in the third person, so it gets confusing. But if you really break down every phrase, you can see that this is what she's talking to her daughter about. And it makes sense because it just mentioned her mother, right? So her mother was just mentioned a couple verses earlier. And this is part of the instruction that she is giving her daughter. Now, she's going to mention something in this verse that I believe is a hypothetical. I don't believe it actually took place. She's going to mention a woman leaning upon Solomon's shoulder, okay? I don't think that this actually took place. I think it's part of the instruction where she's talking about a husband and a wife and how they're committed to each other. But I could be wrong, okay? But let's look at what this verse is saying in verse 5. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? And so here's Solomon's mother-in-law speaking to her daughter. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning upon your husband, basically, leaning upon her beloved, okay? And then it says, I raised thee up under the apple tree. So we know it's Solomon's mother-in-law speaking because she says, I raised thee up. So it's a mom of somebody speaking, okay? And she said, who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? I raised thee up under the apple tree. There thy mother brought thee forth. There she brought thee forth that bare thee. So this is the mom of Solomon's wife. Okay? It's the mother-in-law of Solomon speaking to her daughter. And she says, I raised thee up under the apple tree. You're like, what? What does that have to do with some woman leaning upon Solomon? Go to Song of Solomon 2. Song of Solomon 2. Song of Solomon 2. Well, when you're cross-referencing the Bible, of course we can use the entire Bible to cross-reference. However, if it's in the same chapter or the same book, it actually has even more of an impact because the same author might say something in multiple ways, and you can use that specifically. I'm sure the apple tree, I didn't look it up, is mentioned throughout the Bible. But it makes sense to go to the Song of Solomon where it mentions the apple tree specifically, and it's going to actually give you a very strong correlation and help you understand what's being referred to. It says in Song of Solomon 2, verse 3, as the apple tree, this is Solomon's wife speaking to Solomon, as the apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons. I sat down under his shadow with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. She refers to her husband as an apple tree, with the idea being most trees don't produce anything, and her husband produces fruit, symbolically speaking. But she compliments him by saying he's like an apple tree. And what she says is, I sat down under his shadow with great delight. Now, as we talked about in Song of Solomon 2, what she's expressing is with great delight she was underneath the authority of her husband. With great delight she said, I do, and I promise to follow this person and have him lead our home, and I'm glad to be underneath his shadow and protection and have him as the leader. That's why it's under his shadow, right? Now, this does not mean that men are better than women, but it does mean that husbands are the heads of their homes. That is what the Bible teaches, regardless of whether or not it's popular. And instead of getting mad about it as a woman, why not be like Solomon's wife that's happy about it? With great delight, I sat under his shadow, right? And she's saying, I sat under his shadow with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. So when it mentions the apple tree, she's talking about basically a husband being the head of the home. Go back to Song of Solomon 8. What Solomon's mother-in-law is telling her daughter is a reminder that, you know what? The husband is the head of the home. He's the apple tree. You sit under the shadow, okay? Now, here's the thing. If you stopped at this verse, then you might walk away and say, well, that means men can do whatever they want because they're the heads of their home. And there are people in religions that take this philosophy. They'll be like, husbands are the heads of the home, so they're not accountable to anyone. They can go out and do whatever they want. They can just party and sleep around and drink or whatever, and they're above their wives, so they can do whatever they want. And if you just stopped at verse 5, that might be what you think the Bible's teaching. But that's not the end of the chapter, and it's not the end of the book, okay? Because what's mentioned after verse 5 is about jealousy in marriage. And what she's telling her daughter, and I believe hypothetically, is that husbands are the heads of the home, and there's a woman leaning upon your husband, yet you have a right to be jealous about it. Just because he's the head of the home doesn't mean he can go out and do whatever he wants. And look, when you get married as a husband, yes, you are the head of the home. That does not mean you can do whatever you want, right? Two become one, and you are bonding to each other. Your body belongs to your spouse. And you don't have a right to flirt with someone you're not married to or have some other woman leaning upon you when you're married to somebody else. That's what's being stated in these verses, okay? Verse number 6. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. Now, what is that referring to? Because it's going to speak about jealousy in this verse, and this is Solomon's wife speaking to Solomon, okay? And I do believe it was hypothetical, but whether it was or not, she's telling her husband, hey, set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. Why does it say heart and arm? Heart represents what? The inside. Arm represents what? The outside, right? I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, throughout the Bible, the heart's the inside, and the arm would be your actions or the outside, right? Think about the working hand, right? I mean, so what it's referring to is basically love your spouse and be devoted on the inside and on the outside. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm. Because here's the thing, you say, Brother Stuckey, you know what? I love my spouse, I love my wife, I love my husband, and they know it. I don't need to tell them that I love them. They know it. Inside my heart, man, I am completely devoted to my wife. I'm completely devoted to my husband. How often do you tell your spouse that? Well, I said it when we got married. I do. I promised to love you forever. That's not good enough. You might have them as a seal in your heart, but you got to actually put it on your arm also. It can't just be on the inside. How is someone going to know that you really love and care about them if it's all on the inside, and yet you never show it on the outside? And what that verse is expressing is, don't just love your spouse on the inside, actually show it on the outside. Number one, make sure you show it to the person you're married to, but it also ought to be aware to other people. They can tell how much you love your spouse. Because when Solomon's wife went around town, it's like there was a banner over me was love. Everybody knew Solomon loved this woman. They knew that they were devoted to one another. It ought to be on your arm and not just in your heart. But on the contrary, you could just go through the motions on the outside because you want to look the part, but on the inside you don't feel that way. Truly, if you get right on the inside, it's usually going to work itself out to the outside. We understand that. And the inside is more important, but you've got to actually show it on the outside. I mean, if the last time you told your spouse that you love them was like 3 months ago, there's something wrong. But they know it. Yeah, but you got to show it. Why would you feel like embarrassed to tell your spouse that you love them, that you care about them, that you want to spend time with them? I mean, why is it so hard to compliment your spouse? You can't just have it inside your heart. You got to actually show it on your arm. And I believe this is true for husbands and wives, but I do believe that it's more important that oftentimes the wife can feel like her husband's not complimenting her, and she can start questioning, does my husband really love me? Does he care me? He's not showing to me how much that he loves me. As men, we aren't always the best with expressing our feelings or saying how we feel, but we should strive to tell our spouses how much we love them and care about them. It should not just simply be in the arm, but on the heart, or in the heart, but on the arm as well. And if not, then you see jealousy coming in marriage. Jealousy can result simply because a husband and wife that do love each other on the inside aren't actually showing that to each other and telling them how much that they care. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. Man, that's romantic. Love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath the most vehement flame. Why does the Bible say love is strong as death? Right? Because you know what? When it comes to a wedding invitation, every wedding invitation has what verse? Song of Solomon 8, verse 7. Right? I mean, at our wedding, when we gave out invites, Song of Solomon, many waters cannot quench love. Right? How romantic. But you don't always see on the wedding invitation, love is strong as death. Right? So what is the Bible stating here? Well, go to Proverbs 6. Proverbs 6. Proverbs chapter 6. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. Now, it mentions jealousy. Let me quickly describe to you two different words here that a lot of people are confused about. Jealousy and envy. These are two different words. Jealous versus being envious. Jealousy and envy. Okay? In our modern day, the word envy is not often used. I'm also guilty of using the word jealousy for both just because that's the way it's used, right? So sometimes you just kind of say it. What's the difference between these words? Well, look, if somebody stole my cell phone, I would be very mad. You say, why? Because I'm jealous over my cell phone. This belongs to me. But if somebody steals somebody else's cell phone, well, that's not mine. And being jealous is when it's something that belongs to you. And you can be jealous about your own things. Envy is when it's something that belongs to somebody else. You're envious because you want that car, you want that wife, you want that house, or whatever it may be, right? And the Bible's speaking of jealousy because here's the thing. When you get married as a husband, yes, you're the head of the home, but you belong to your wife. The wife belongs to her husband. Two become one, and you are meant to be committed to your spouse. So here's the thing. It is okay for a husband to be jealous. It is okay for a wife to be jealous. Yes, the husband's the head of the home, but what we're seeing is it's okay for a wife to be jealous over her husband if he's not showing, his love, or he's doing things that are questionable, or flirting with someone he's not married to. It is okay to actually be jealous, the Bible's stating. The Bible states in Proverbs 6, it says in verse 32, "But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance." Now the jealousy is being linked with the adultery in verse 32. Jealousy is the rage of a man. It will make him very angry. He will not spare. It says he will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts. What is the Bible stating? Here's what the Bible's stating. Guy comes home from work, and he catches his wife cheating on him. That guy is liable to beat that other guy to death. And you know what? That other guy could be the richest guy in the world. He could be the Bill Gates of the world or whatever, say, I'll give you $100 million. It's like, you can give many gifts, but you know what? That's not going to cut it. Because his rage, he will just beat that other guy to death, right? It's what's known in law as crimes of passion. I don't have the exact statistics, but it's a pretty high percentage of murder is as a result of adultery, right? It's a very high percentage related to this. It's called crimes of passion, okay? And the Bible's stating that, jealousy can be so strong in someone. Love is strong as death. What's that stating? It's saying that people actually kill sometimes over love. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. Look, it's literally stating people might kill someone if their spouse was being unfaithful. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. Okay, go back to Song of Solomon 8. Song of Solomon 8. Song of Solomon chapter 8. Now, here's the thing. Jealousy is okay in marriage, but you can take it too far. The Bible's stating something that might actually happen, where if a guy caught that, he might kill that other guy. And it also happens in reverse as well, where women would kill, the other woman, or sometimes even both of them when they catch them. Now, here's the thing. Obviously, murder would be wrong. Okay? I'm not justifying that. Obviously, you can take jealousy too far. But people make jealousy being out to be like a bad thing. It's like, well, how dare you be a jealous husband? How dare you be a jealous wife? Look, it's normal that if you're married to someone and they belong to you according to the Bible, that you want to know what they're doing with their life. Not just, well, they didn't come home last night. I don't know what happened. But I shouldn't ask any questions. I can't be jealous. Are you insane? Right? I mean, when you get married, you belong to your spouse. And here's the reality. When you say I do, you are committing to your spouse. And you know what? Your spouse has a right to know what you're doing with your life. You shouldn't be hiding things from your spouse and getting them to be jealous because you're not being open and honest about your life. Look, marriage is a different relationship than with anybody else. For your friends, hey, you know what? You don't have to tell them everything in your life. You don't have to tell them everything that you're doing. You don't have to check in on them, let them know, hey, this is what time I'll be there or whatever. But when you get married, it's actually different. And here's the thing. The Bible talks about the spirit of jealousy that can come over someone. If you're not being open and honest, it can actually cause your spouse to start really questioning things. Even if nothing is going on, it can cause them to start to really wonder, right? So look, in marriage, be open and honest with your spouse because jealousy is a real thing that can take place in marriage. And it says in verse number 7, many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would utterly be contemned. Now, this is a verse that is often quoted. It's always in marriages. People talk about this verse. It's a great verse. But I think a lot of times people just look at this verse in a poetic way like, oh, it sounds so great. But did you stop to think about what the Bible's actually stating? Right? Because many verses we read, and until you actually stop to think about it, it's kind of like it goes over your head. Many waters cannot quench love. What is that actually saying? Think of the storms of life. That's an expression you hear a lot, right? Churches preach on the storms of life. I preach on the storms of life. And basically, you think of storms like floods and waters. And what the Bible's stating is many waters cannot quench love. No matter how many storms you go through in your marriage can withstand those storms. That's what the Bible's stating. I mean, it's a great verse, and it's also a great verse when you actually think about it. Many waters cannot quench love. And what that tells us is that if your marriage gets destroyed and you end it, you made that choice or your spouse made that choice. Because your marriage can withstand any storms that actually come. Unless one of those people in that marriage decides to give up. And then you kind of give into that storm. But the Bible states many waters cannot quench love. It is impossible unless you allow it to happen. That's what the Bible states. Neither can the floods drown it. Well, think about somebody who's in water. If there's a lot of water and there's a major flood, people die from floods, right? One of my best friends in college, drowned when he was 20 years old when I was in college. And it's just like, a person can die from floods that come. But actually, your marriage, it can't be destroyed by the outside unless you allow it to. And so that can be an encouraging verse because the Bible states, you can actually overcome your problems. And look, I don't know the problems that everybody's going through in their marriage or in their life, but the reality is on any topic, you can actually withstand the outside storms of life. Think of the Sermon on the Mount and how it ends. Two types of people. Those that basically set the foundation upon a rock and those in the sand. The one on the rock withstands any storms, right? The winds come and blow a beat upon that house. And it's like you have all the storms mentioned in Matthew 7, but if you found your house upon a rock, it will withstand it. If you found it upon the sand, it will be destroyed. The same thing is true in marriage. If you're committed and say, hey, we're going to stay together forever. We're going to fix things no matter what. Even if major storms do come, you can withstand those storms. But you do need both husband and wife together on that. It can't just be one person. Both people have to be committed to it. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Storms are difficult to go through. Right? For me personally, right now in my life, I'm not really going through major storms that I know of. But what I know from experience is, even if you're not going through storms in the present situation, you will in the future in some way or another. Right? And when you go through storms of life, it's not easy. It's not fun. The easy thing is to just back down. But the Bible states you can actually overcome it if you have both husband and wife committed to this. Many waters cannot quench love. Neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would utterly be contemned. Being contemned means to be looked down on. And the idea would be if you sell everything in your house and people look at that house, they'd be like, your house is terrible. There's no chairs, there's no tables. It's just like because you sold everything in the house, right? And that's what the Bible's stating there. Basically how for a strong love and a good marriage, a wise person would be willing to give up their finances to have a good marriage. Right? It's like money is not the most important thing in life. Wouldn't you rather be happy? And you can be happy without being rich. And the Bible states that, having a good marriage, a wise person would be willing to sell all they have to have a good marriage. Right? The Bible states in Song of Solomon 8, verse 8, we have a little sister and she hath no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she shall be spoken for? As I talked about a few weeks ago, it's referring to Solomon's wife's younger sister, and she hath no breasts, indicating that she is young. Okay, now, early in the chapter, she talked about her brother breastfeeding, so it could be that she's one of the oldest children, and she's got a lot of young brothers and sisters in the house. That mentions the brother basically breastfeeding. Now it mentions a little sister that is not yet physically mature. Obviously, Solomon's wife is physically mature, so she's 10 years plus older than some of these people, right? She's a lot older than some of her brothers and sisters. And she says, even though she's not mature now, there's going to come a day when someone is going to speak for her. Meaning there's going to come a day when there's going to be a guy that's going to say, hey, I'm interested in this girl once she is actually physically mature, once she's older. And what are we going to do when that day comes? Because here's the thing, I don't think an older brother or a father is really going to be too keen on just giving his daughter over to some other guy, right? I mean, you're going to be very careful about that. You're going to build a border of, what does it say here in verse 9? If she be a wall, we'll build upon her a palace of silver. It's like, yeah, I'm going to build an entire palace around my daughter to protect her, right? And if she be a door, we'll enclose her with boards of cedar. Like, nobody's getting on the inside, right? And it's using symbolism there to express this. But you have to realize that at the end of the day, the father is the head of the home, and there's a responsibility to take care of your daughter. And when your daughter gets married, there is a change in authority structure for you as a parent and also for your daughter. Because your daughter now goes to another guy being the head of that marriage, and you are no longer in authority over your daughter. They have their own marriage, right? Now, here's the thing about this. As a father, you're going to be pretty protective of your daughter and make sure she's marrying the right guy. I mean, if you're handing over the keys to something, you better make sure you're handing it over to someone you can trust. Because as a father, the Bible does teach that you do have the ability to say yes or no to approve or disapprove that marriage. And so if you're going to hand over your daughter and say, you know what, I trust my daughter with this other guy, yes, you know, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage if she is willing, then you're going to want to make sure it's the right guy, right? It says in verse 10, I am a wall of my breasts like towers. Then was I in his eyes as one that found favor. And what she states is, you know what, my husband found me attractive because I was physically mature. I am a wall in my breasts like towers, you know, rather than, as it says in verse 8, hath no breasts. Okay, now go to 1 Corinthians 7. 1 Corinthians 7. Now, the Bible's speaking about the proper age for marriage in Song of Solomon 8, verses 8 through 10. Now, this is not something that the Bible says that basically this is the exact age, where it does give a scenario we're going to look at, but that's not necessarily based on the exact year. It's dependent on the person, okay? Let me just show you the verse, and then I'll explain what I'm talking about. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 36. But if any man thinketh that he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin, if she pass the flower of her age and need so require, let him do what he will, he sinneth not, let them marry. When it says pass the flower of her age, the Bible's being symbolic to reference a woman that goes through physical maturity, okay? And she's a woman that is physically mature. She's a woman that now has the ability where she could actually have children if she was actually married, okay? And so the Bible states that if you're going to marry someone, at the very least, if you're going to marry a girl, she has to be old enough where she's at that point. Now, here's the thing. You know, we talked earlier about PDA, and it applies to this as well. You say, well, what's the line? That's the wrong question to ask. Because, for example, the Bible teaches that men are to have short hair and women have long hair. Now, I got my hair cut on Monday, right? My hair last Sunday was a little bit longer than I liked, but nobody would have looked at my hair and said, Brother Stuckey's hair looks like a woman's hair. I mean, look at how long it is. I mean, it was nowhere near what would be considered long, right? I mean, it was longer than this, but nobody could say that it's long. And I mean, unless you're in the military and you have got to have a shaved head or whatever, it's like my hair was not long, but, you know, I wanted to get a haircut, right? And so my hair last week, although it was longer, was a guy's haircut. It was short, right? For a woman, she should have long hair. Now, look, in general, you know, our church, people love the Lord. They know what the Bible says. They try to apply it. You'll notice a big difference between the length of guys' hair and girls' hair. You say, why? Because none of us should go to the gray area. As a guy, I should strive to have short hair. Like, how long can I allow it? Can I let it grow one more day before I'm in sin? That's a dumb question. Trying to get the exact line to get really close to sin before I'm sinning, that's a dumb question. It's a dumb statement. It's like, as a guy, I should strive to look like a guy. I should try to dress and talk and act like a guy, have a hair like a guy, and not be anywhere near the gray line. For a lady, it's the same as well. Look, there's nothing wrong with a woman getting a haircut. But if a woman's hair is really short like mine, then it's too short, because women are meant to have long hair. And nobody's meant to have medium gray area. We don't know if it's a guy or a girl haircut, right? No one should be even near that line, okay? And when it comes to marriage, the exact line where it's okay is if a woman is physically mature. But why would you be close to that line? Right? I mean, because the Bible's giving you a direct statement, but it's just like, why would you be close to that line? I mean, just imagine, because the Bible states as a guy, you should get the approval from the father to marry their daughter. Can you imagine, theoretically speaking, you approach a father at our church and you tell them, hey, I'm really interested in your daughter. I just have one question. Is she physically mature? I didn't know if she had reached that point where she had passed the flower of her age. I mean, wouldn't that be insane? It's like, why would you be even near that line? Like, what is wrong with you? Right? So yeah, you know what the Bible states, technically, yeah, if she's past the flower of her age, it's old enough, but if you're anywhere near that line, you're just insane. Right? Now, here's the thing about this. The reason why maybe it mentions this is because you have to realize the age of marriage has varied a lot throughout history, and oftentimes it's based on outside factors. For example, if you live in societies where there was a lot of illnesses and plagues and people dying at a young age, people got married earlier. You say, why? Because they didn't know if they lived to be 30 years old. So they said, you know what, hey, I'll get married at 15 because of the fact I don't know if I'm going to live to be an old person. Right? There have been times where factors really affected the age people get married. But let me tell you something that is not true, and I have statistics to prove this, because you'll hear people say, well, in the past, everybody got married at the age of 12. It's normal for, 30-year-old guys to marry, 12-year-olds. And in some of these countries and religions, they have like children brides. Is that okay? Well, she hasn't passed the flower of her age. It's like she's not yet 10 years old. No, it's not okay. Right? That's weird. Right? But people will say, well, everybody got married at the age of 12. Well, here's some statistics, and I don't have any for the Philippines, but I have for the United States. In 1890, when everybody got married at the age of 12, supposedly, the average age for a guy to get married was 26.1. The average age for a woman was 22.0 for their first marriage. Now, of course, if people's spouse died, they might get remarried. It's not factoring that in because that's not the first marriage. That would actually increase the age. It's saying the first marriage, the average age for a woman to get married was 22.0. That's not 12 years old. 22.0 is nowhere near 12. Now, in general, what you're going to see as we look at all of these years is there's a bit of a gap between husbands and wives, 4 years, which, look, if 26 and 22, there's nothing weird about that. It's okay for the husband to be older than his wife as long as they're both adults, right? The reason why there's a bit of a gap, though, is because of the fact, especially in 1890, the husbands were the sole providers for their families. So they had to save up money to be prepared to basically take care of a home. So basically, men, it would take them a few more years to actually be ready because it's a big responsibility that you're entering into. 26.1 and 22.0. 1900, 25.9, 21.9. 1910, 25.1, 21.6. 1920, 24.6, 21.2. 1930, 24.3, 21.3. 1940, 24.3, 21.5. I mean, it's pretty consistent. For women, the average age of first marriage, 21.2 to 22. Right? Nowhere do you see 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, of course, if this is the average age and it's 22, some women would be 18 when they got married. Well, if she's past the flower of her age, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. 18 is fine. She's an adult. Some people do get married younger. My sister got married when she was 17 years old, but she was also graduating college. So some people do get married at a younger age, and obviously some of these things are dependent upon where you live because there's laws and things such as that. But you know what? 18 to 26, if that's general, almost every woman fit in that category, well, they're adults. 18 to 26, average age being 22 years. Now, before we get to 1950, you'll see the ages drop slightly because of World War II. And so people got married at a younger age because a lot of people thought it was the end of the world. You thought people got scared during COVID. It's like people during World War II, they thought this is the end, right? So in 1950, 22.8 and 20.3. Well, that's still above 20 as the average age. And yes, they're getting married earlier because of the fact they're not sure how long their lives are going to be. They're afraid the world is in chaos. But they're still making sure they get their basic education of high school and graduate and that they're an actual adult. Look, no normal father or mother is going to be like, yeah, I'll let my 11-year-old get married. It's like, what? Why would you let your 11-year-old daughter get married? Do you really think? I mean, are there any fathers in this room, you have no problem with your 11-year-old daughter getting married? It's like, come on, do you really think that hundreds of years ago, most fathers were like, yeah, it's okay. It's like, and here's what's interesting about this. It's talking about physical maturity in, a time, and obviously this varies depending upon the woman, but let me just explain something to you. A girl that's 12 years old looks at the world a lot differently than a grown adult. What would you have to talk to them about? I mean, we were all younger at one time. I'm just saying, at being in my 30s, I look at the world differently than someone who's really young. You talk differently, you act differently. Not even just physical maturity, like emotionally and mentally, I don't really see where you'd be like, we talked about Muhammad. It's just like, she's the one for me. It's like, what would you talk to her about, right? 1960, 22.8 and 20.3. The exact is 1950. 1970, 23.2, 20.8, 1980, 24.7 and 22, 1990, 26.1 and 23.9, 2000, 26.8, 25.1, 2010, 28.2, 26.1. So nowhere do you see on any statistics that I have, and look, I would put statistics from further back in history, but you're not going to find them. You're not going to find accurate statistics from 500 AD. So I've got as far back as I can in the U.S. because that's pretty much the only country, except maybe the U.K., where you can find statistics like this. But look, you're not seeing the average age like really super young, right? Now look, I would admit that yes, I do believe that in the past there have been women getting married at an earlier age, especially in today's world. Women are more career women than they used to be. So basically they were really training as a young woman to be a stay-at-home mom. So you know what, yes, they were probably getting married at a younger age, not at 12. Not at 13, not at 14, at least not in a normal country. Now, countries with some perverse religion, it's like, yeah, they do a lot of weird things. It's like children brides. It's like, yes, my daughter that just got born, yes, you will marry her, in 20 years, and it's a guy that's like 30 years old already. He's going to be like 50 years old. Yeah, weird things happen in other countries, not in a normal country, and not in just a sane society, right? It's not normal for a really, really young girl to get married. And it's never been normal. Turn your Bible to Song of Solomon 8. Song of Solomon 8. We'll close up. Song of Solomon 8. Song of Solomon 8. And look, I also believe that, yeah, what the Bible does say as she's past the flower of her age, but you got to use common sense in the society you live in as well. That's like at the very bare minimum. But I'll be honest with you, most fathers don't want their daughters that just reached that age to get married. And it certainly wouldn't be appropriate in our country. It's like, well, she's 14 years, that's too young, right? If you're going to get approval from a father, it's just like he's going to want his daughter to be older, okay? And so, look, you shouldn't even be near the line of what would be appropriate or not, where it's even a question mark. It's just, and here's what you have to understand. When it comes to marriage, in dating, what's the purpose of dating? Purpose of dating or courting or whatever you want to call it is to basically find out if that's the person you're going to marry. Now, here's the thing. If somebody is too young to marry, do you know what that tells you? They're too young to date, right? Too young to marry, too young to date. Now, coming from the U.S., what's common is people start dating and they're not even 10 years old yet. I mean, literally in grade school, you have like boyfriend, girlfriend, and then they'll kiss and do things like a boyfriend and girlfriend would do. It's like they're 8 years old. It's like, I'll be honest, because, I was half a day homeschooled in high school so I could play on the soccer team. And it's like, you literally get bullied if you've never dated anyone, because my parents said, no, you're not allowed to date. You're too young. So it's just kind of like, I was told that if you ever go on any dates, it's going to be chaperoned by mom and dad. It's like, well, I'm not going on any dates then, right? And literally, you get bullied in school. It's like, you're 14 years old, you've never dated anyone? But, it's just bizarre when you really look at it from a Bible standpoint, because do 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds, are they really ready to just, and when I say date, I'm saying they hang out alone, no one else around. Do you really trust two 15-year-olds to hang out alone at a house? It's like, is that really what you would want your son or your daughter doing? I mean, I wouldn't trust my kids doing that at that age. You're insane. Right. I mean, make no provision for the flesh. Right. And 15-year-olds aren't going to get married. Why are they dating then? It's too young. Right? And look, obviously every parent has a right to decide what that line is. And we could have different opinions on that. But you know what? If they're too young to marry, what are they doing dating? Right. All you're doing is asking for problems long term. And what if they marry somebody else? Because look, 15-year-olds aren't going to get married at the age of 15. Right. And then all of a sudden they hang out for a year, and then they, all of a sudden they've got baggage from that previous relationship where they shouldn't have even been in that. Now, the good thing at a church is that as we have a lot of young people at our church and they grow up, they're going to know people at our church via soul winning and church. And you know what? You can form friendships at a young age and not going alone and hanging out with nobody else around, but you can meet people that could potentially be someone that you might marry one day. I believe church is the best place to meet somebody, right? I hope my kids can meet somebody in church, right? It's the best case scenario. And they can actually get to know someone without just like dating privately and away from stuff, and actually get to know them. And yeah, you know what? At the age of 15, 16, 17, they're getting older. They're still not ready to get married. That's right. It's like, and look, you can have your own opinions if you want, but it's like my kids aren't going to be dating at a young age. They're going to be too young. Now, you can get to know someone and maybe think towards the future, but it's like dating as in, being, and look, I don't believe even for adults being alone together unsupervised, where you're in a place where anything could happen. I don't think that's a smart scenario either. It's like you meet people at church, you talk to them, you get to know them. It's just like, but then just going privately to somebody's house and nobody is around, that is not a safe thing or a smart thing for anybody to do. Right? So if you're too young to get married, then what are you doing dating? Right? 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, too young to get married, too young to date, right? So, and look, you might think, Brother Stuckey, you're being so strict. You know what? I'm actually glad my parents were really strict now. Because, yeah, it was a bit embarrassing. Right? It's just like my parents are the strictest parents. But you know what? I'm not even friends with a single person I went to high school with now. Do you really think I care what their opinion of me is? I'm sure if I walk back into Bridgeport, West Virginia, people are like, oh, there's the crazy religious guy. We heard that guy went like crazy religious. He's like leading a cult in the Philippines and everything like that. Do you really think I care what their opinion is? I really don't care now whether or not I impress some ungodly person that doesn't believe on Jesus Christ. Right. But peer pressure is a powerful thing, right? But look, when it comes to marriage, you know what? Are you old enough to get married? If not, what are you doing dating, right? Song of Solomon 8, verse 11. Solomon had a vineyard at Bilhaman. He let out the vineyard unto keepers, everyone for the fruit thereof is to bring 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard which is mine is before me. Thou, Solomon, must have 1,000, and those that keep the fruit thereof 200. And the Bible is referring to salaries there in verses 11 and 12. And you see Solomon makes more money, 1,000. You say, why? He's the one who owns it. And the owner should make more money than those that work in a company. Now, in our modern day, some people get this idea, everybody should have the same salary. That doesn't make any logical sense at all. Obviously, the owner of a company is going to make more than the employee. You say, why? Because he's the one who has the stress and is backing the company by his finances and put out the risk, so of course he's going to make more money. Look, if your first day on the job, you say, well, I should be making as much money as everybody. Why? What skills would you have to warrant that? It's like, obviously, your first day on the job, you should have the lowest salary because you're just starting, right? You can't expect to make as much money as someone who's been working there the whole time. And look, Solomon makes a lot more money. It's like, how dare him make more money? I mean, he's the owner of it. The person who owns it is going to make more money than the employee. It's just common sense. Look, if you worked at a company and you've worked there for 20 years and somebody gets hired into the same position as you, but they're brand new out of college and they make the same salary as you, that would make you really angry, wouldn't it? I mean, you'd be really upset. It's like, man, I've been working this whole time. And it's just like, I actually had a friend of mine who basically, that kind of happened to him. He had been working for years and years and years, and he was training somebody and making the same salary with all the experience. And, his father reminded him, he's like, well, remember the parable in the Bible? It's like those that were hired the first hour of the day, the second, you agreed, right? Can't he do what he wants with his money? And then, of course, he backed down. He's like, yeah, you know what, you have a point. But just by human nature, of course, you're going to be upset. You're going to be just like those people. It's like, I work longer, I work more, I should make more money, right? And so that's what it's speaking about in verses 11 and 12. Verse 13. Verse 13 is our verse of the week. And it says, thou that dwellest in the gardens, the companions hearken to thy voice, cause me to hear. What is a companion? A companion is somebody that you share company with, or it's a synonym for friends. So when it says companions, it's referring to the friends of Solomon. And what she's telling her husband is that, you know what? You're a really popular guy, Solomon. Everybody likes to be around you. Everybody's there to hearken to you and to listen to you. I mean, doesn't the Bible speak about when the Queen of Sheba enters into town, everybody listens to Solomon? Everybody wants the wisdom of Solomon. I mean, everybody's hearkening to him. He was a popular person. I mean, anywhere Solomon went, he could have guys to hang out with and people that wanted to be around him and I mean, everybody wants to be around Solomon. And she says, you know what? You're around all these people. They all love you. But you know what? Cause me to hear your voice also. Cause me to hear it. And it's a reminder toward the end of this book about we need to make sure we're spending time with our spouses. And not just spending our time just hanging out with everybody else, but actually spending time with our spouses and being around them. And it's a very basic thing, but doesn't it make sense that if you want a strong marriage, you got to be around each other? Right? And that's the reminder in Song of Solomon 8, verse 13. It's a great verse, very powerful verse. Cause me to hear it. Make sure you spend time with me. I know you're popular. That's great. I have no problem. But make sure you actually spend time with me. And this is something that sometimes both as husbands and wives, that we've got to just kind of take a break, even if we have all these things we want to do or have to do or feel like we have to do, and just say, you know what, I'm going to actually schedule time to spend time with my spouse. Make sure I'm spending time with them and setting aside other things that are not as important. Verse 14, make haste, my beloved, and be thou like to a rower to the young hart upon the mountains of spices. And in verse 14, she's basically encouraging her husband and working hard and basically, working hard at your job. And from a Bible standpoint to us, it's like, yeah, you know what? Work hard at your job. Make sure you're being very busy and accomplish something, but then you also have to have a balance. Make sure you spend time with your spouse as well. Now, I love the Song of Solomon. I hope people have learned a lot through this book. To me, it's one of the most interesting books because a lot of stuff is kind of complicated. You got to break it down. But the reason why I wanted to preach through this book is because all of us that are married have things that we've learned or been reminded about that we can apply to our lives. I can state that studying through this book, being honest with myself, I looked at a lot of areas where I said, you know what? I'm not exactly, the perfect husband. There's areas I need to improve. I need to do a better job. And look, this series is not about husbands saying, that's right, you preached against my wife for 9 weeks or whatever, or the wife saying, you preached against my husband. The point is to find your own personal flaws and just state, you know what, I've seen the mirror of the Word of God, I've looked in the glass, and I do see some problems. I do see some things that I can do a better job on. And deciding, you know what, I'm going to actually make an effort to make some changes in my life. Why? So you can have a stronger marriage. Let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to be here today and getting to see your word, and ask you to help us to apply this chapter, but this entire book to our lives. And obviously to those of us that are married, help us in our lives, help us to have strong marriages, help us to make changes and continue to grow close to one another as we get older. Also ask you to help those that are younger at our church that are not yet married. Help them to find the right person. I ask you to help them meet a godly person and help them learn this wisdom ahead of time before they even enter into marriage. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.